Welcome back. This is Jennifer, and thank you so much for stopping by today. I will be doing a bunch of cards and techniques showing how you can take a die and use it as a stencil. But not just for basic stenciling. We're going to step up the techniques and show ways to add texture and interest to it. I will be demonstrating these techniques with one die, a very intricate, beautiful die. You could do this with any die you may have, but I thought if I used one and then demonstrated everything with it, it would show the versatility even more. Also, I needed a bunch of thank you cards, and I thought this was the best way to sit down and make a lot at once. This is one of those techniques where if you make one card, making a few extra at the same time doesn't take much more time. I will be using the Simon Says Stamp Boho Circle die to create my stencil. I like this die because of the detail and how it creates a focal point on your card. Now you can use many different dies for this, but those intricate dies are extra special. Now you could also use stencils for today's techniques, but this way we can take our more expensive dies and stretch them to get more use from them. Keep in mind there is a Boho circle stencil that's bigger, and I'll show you that later too. I forgot to mention that along the way I'll be sharing two different ways to create a stencil from a die. Very simple, but one works better than the other in different circumstances. Let's first start with creating a stencil from cardstock that you can reuse a few times. So I die cut from some cardstock there, and we'll use that as a stencil many times. I'm also getting some masking paper out. Now this is an older masking paper. I do prefer the Gina K Designs Masking Magic, but I ran out and I had to place another order. But any masking paper will work. The reason I like Masking Magic is you can put a lot of ink on it and it won't bleed through. But use whatever you have. What I'm doing here is putting little marks through the holes in the pattern to make masks of various sizes so that we'll be able to ink over our DIY stencil with multiple colors. So here I just put little dots through the holes towards the center, and I'm cutting right inside our pencil lines. So now I have this little mask that will mask off that center area. It takes me a little bit of time to create all these masks, but I'll use them on multiple cards. This will allow me to do multiple colors and have a nice crisp definition between the color switches. However, if you don't want to do the masking, you can do multicolor but blend the colors across the stencil that we created, which you'll see me do in our later technique too. So here I did some dots. I cut just outside of it just to make sure it would cover that area there in the center. Now I continue to do this. Notice how in the center there is looks like a sun ray. Thought it'd be fun to ink right around that and have that part yellow so it really stands out. So I'm making the little marks along those V's. Then I will use my scissors and just cut that out. Again, a little bit outside the pencil line so I can be sure that I cover all of the open area in those rays. Okay, once I have all of my little masks together, which you'll see in a moment, it's time to do some stenciling. At first, what I did is I took a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I taped it behind our stencil. So that die cut piece on the front is what I'm calling my stencil in this case. It's just cut from white cardstock. You could definitely use a scrap here. You could try to use an acetate, but an intricate die like this doesn't really want to cut through acetate. I find using cardstock works great. Then we can use our DIY stencil on a card when we're done, which you'll see. Okay, so I have those taped together. Now I have my circle mask that I will put on top so I can mask off different areas to do different colors. So I'll start with the largest circle here, place that right in the middle. Now you can put whatever inks you prefer over this, oxide inks, distress ink, anything. I decided to reach for mostly Gina K Designs dye inks today, simply because I like the colors. I'm also using the new Gina K Design brushes. They're white bristles with a white handle and a nice medium size, but you can use absolutely any inking tool you want here. Okay, once I've done all of the blue area, I'll remove my DIY stencil from my cardstock. At this point, I thought this was kind of cumbersome, removing this tape each time, so I decided to change up my plans so I could quickly make more cards. So I grabbed my Waffle Flower Water Media Mat. This is just a great tool to ink on, and it's got this little ledge in the corner that you can put your cardstock in and then put your stencil in, and each time it'll line up in the same spot. Now I have a fresh piece of cardstock here. while I have this stencil out and my ink out and my mask on, I might as well make multiple backgrounds. So I will ink up 4 different cardstocks with this blue ink, and it'll be in the same position on each because I'll go back to the corner of this media mat to position my cardstock and my stencil each time. You could use the corner of your MISTI, or you could just line it up on your desk and just tape it down there, whatever works for you. This is another reason I make a lot of cards at once, because if you try something and you realize that it doesn't work very well, you'll think of something different to do and try it right then. That way you'll remember in the future what might work best for this type of technique. So I feel like you learn more the more you make multiple cards. Okay, so after I've inked up 4 different cardstock pieces with this blue inked ring, I can remove the mask from the center. Now I will move on to the next mask. And again, I'm lining up my cardstock that already has the blue ring on it with the stencil on top in the corner of my media mat. So here is the next mask piece, and I'll line it up with that sun in the middle. Now, you could, if you wanted to, mask off the blue that you've already done. But I didn't want to cut a mask for that. I didn't want to take the time. So instead, I'm just inking right up at close to that blue. I do overlap with the blue a little bit, but that's okay because it'll give a bit of a variation to the blue. So a little bit of the green will go in the blue area, but in the end, you don't really notice it much anyways. So you can either do this light-handed, heavy-handed, depending on if you want a light or vibrant look. And once again, once I've inked up one, I can remove the stencil, pop the other cardstock piece underneath, and ink that one up too. So I'll again do this with all 4 pieces. Okay, now we can remove the sun mask and move to the next smallest mask. So it's this circle one for the center, line it up with our background, and move on to the next color. And I ended up doing yellow in this area. So it's really just kind of the rays in that pattern that get that yellow color. The yellow does overlap with the green, but you'll see it doesn't make a bit of difference. I'll continue to do all the pieces with the yellow, then remove that circle mask and place our smaller circle mask as I've done here. And I put orange over that. And then once I've done all of those with orange, I can remove that mask and there'll be no mask at all. And I'll just put a little bit of pink in the center. I really like doing multiple colors over a stencil, whether it's one that I created with a die or just a regular stencil, because it adds a lot of interest to a background and it can be used for a 1-layer card. With this particular stencil, there are many ways we could have done multicolor ink. You could mask off like little sections of pie pieces and do those in different colors, or you could just do stripes of colors along it. Really, the sky is the limit, and each time would give you a different look. So what we end up with is 4 backgrounds that all look very similar, but I'm about to give them each a unique look. I also have my inked stencil that I can cut down and put on a card too. I will share the other way to create a die cut stencil a little bit later. Let's finish these off first. So let's take those 4 similar backgrounds and give each one a different look. The first idea is to grab that stencil and add a paste or a glitter gel over it so you have some texture over your inking. So I'm lining up the stencil again with one of our inked backgrounds, and I'm taping that to my scratch paper here on my desk. And then I will put a glitter gel over it. Now you could use any clear glitter gel or glitter paste here. I'm using Gina Glitter Glitz. The Iridescent is my favorite. I'm running out of it and I had to order more. So I'm putting an even coat of that over our stencil. One of the advantages of making your stencil out of cardstock like I'm doing here is that it'll hold up as you put this over the top. And then our stencil will have the glitter on it. So when we put our stencil on a card, it'll have some glitter on it too. So now I will remove that and check out the beautiful results. You have the color shining through and now have beautiful iridescent glitter on top of it. So that's the first variation to our background. Now let's do one where we add dimension to it. So I'm cutting out layers from our inked piece and then building it back together with dimension. So I have a bunch of circle dies here of different sizes from the Hero Arts Circle Infinity die set. I chose some that kind of fit in the pattern here. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. I'm using the largest one to cut around the outside, and then I'll place the others to fit in the pattern on the inside. So once I run that through my die cut machine, I have these rings of the colored ink that we created with our DIY stencil. By the way, doing this with the die cut itself looks really cool too. Okay, so now I'm going to glue all these pieces back together, but put dimension behind each of them. So I die cut a bunch of circles using all the circle dies that I used to cut out the rings from some inexpensive white cardstock. So I did 2 of the largest circle, glued those together, and put them behind the largest ring. So there's some dimension behind that. Then I went to the next biggest circle, and I have 3 of those, and then the ring to put on top of it. So basically, I'm just putting dimension behind each of the rings. And as we build up, we'll end up with that smaller circle, the one there with the pink on it. That will have a lot of dimension behind it because it all gets built up. This is a card that I plan to hand to a recipient, so I can go to town with all the dimension. But if I were to put this in the mail, I would definitely put it in a padded envelope. But really, when you see it, the dimension behind this really brings it to life and is a lot of fun. Sometimes I feel like it's worth doing. Okay, so there is another way to change up one of your stenciled backgrounds. You can see the difference between the basic and then adding the dimension. Okay, now for our third variation of this inked piece, this one I'm adding some texture by making an impression with the die over the area we inked. Now there are a few different ways to do this, but to line it up just right, I found the technique I'm about to do is the best. Now, remember how I said I'm going to show you another way to make your own stencils later in this video? Well, I went ahead and made it now. I'll show you the technique later. But I die cut my die from some masking paper. I'm removing the back of this off. I'll save the sticky mask part for later on in this video. But see that blue release paper? I might as well not let that go to waste. I'm going to use it for this technique. You could also use a lightweight cardstock for this, but this worked really well. So I'm taking this and lining it up with the pattern. So I have it lined up over my inked piece. Then I'm moving this die around until it pops in place. You'll just feel it kind of click in there. That way I know my die is lined up with the inking underneath. Since you can't see through the die, putting that paper there, that blue release paper or any scrap paper there, that helps to line it up. So I'll tape that in place. Now I have a die cut machine set up to do an impression. That's using that embossing mat, that brown mat. I put my cardstock there, then the die is still in place on top, and I run it back and forth. Every die cut machine is able to do this. You just need to read the instructions. So there I made an impression of the die over our inking. However, it wasn't a very deep impression. I realized that with this die, it's best to put a metal shim under there for added pressure. Well, I can just this time take the die and turn it until I feel it pop into the impression we've already made, and then run it through again. I could have skipped this part, but by having that metal shim under there the second time, it made a deeper impression that made it more visible. Now, this is one of the results that is much better to see in real life. It's so cool. The photos I take just don't capture it. But look at the dimension that we added to our inked areas. It just really looks cool and is definitely worth the effort of that extra step. So here's a close-up comparison. The one on the left is the one we just created where we inked it up and then lined up the die and made the impression. The one on the right is just the inked version, so no impression was made. So that's very smooth. The one on the left has texture. Makes a big difference. And this is an example of the advantage of taking your die and turning it into a stencil, because then you can use the die to make that deep impression along it. So it is worth taking your dies and using them creatively to do inked stenciling, because then you can use them to step it up more. Now remember, we do have our inked stencil piece left over. I just used a large circle die to cut it out, and look how cool it looks. So this was our stencil, but now it's an element that we can use on our card. And it has some glitter on it, because remember I put glitter paste over it? Okay, so let's review. From the round of stenciling we've done so far, we have 5 pieces. We have this one where we added all the dimension behind it. Then we have the piece where we inked and then put the glitter glitz over it, a glitter gel or paste or anything, just to add some sparkle and texture. The third one we have is the stencil itself that we cut out with a die. So it has a little bit of glitter on it and it's a nice element. So we were able to take the tool we made and turn it into an element for our card. The fourth piece is our original one, where we just inked it up, left it as is. So that gives you a nice smooth surface that you could use for one layer cards. And then our fourth version is the one where we made the impression with the die. So we did one round of creating our own stencil, inking over a few backgrounds, added some variations to them, and now we have a bunch of pieces to make multiple cards. Now we'll pull these cards together in a little bit, but first I want to show you the other way that I like to create my own stencil from a die. Now remember before we created our own stencil by die cutting from a piece of cardstock. That seems to be the easiest, and then you can use that cardstock stencil you created on your project. Well, sometimes I find it beneficial to instead create my own stencil from masking paper. That way I can stick it down, I can really get into the nooks and crannies better, but it really just depends. I thought it was best to show. Now remember earlier I used the die to cut from a piece of masking paper. That's what I have here. So you can create your stencil from masking paper, and that way you can hold it down, lay it down and stick to your project wherever you want it to be. Now I am just again inking on a white cardstock background, but this time I'm going off center so I can change up the designs a bit. So you can see how using a die cut mask as a stencil is really nice because you can stick it down, it'll stay put, you can get into the nooks and crannies and then peel it off and move it to your next project. Now here you'll also see I'm reusing those little masks that I created earlier, the circle and sun ones. Notice I'm getting a lot of ink on them. Eventually, that ink will probably bleed through my little masks because there's so much on it. That's why I prefer to use masking magic because it won't bleed through. But if you have a masking paper that tends to wear easily or allow bleed through, what I recommend doing to that mask before you cut it out is put a piece of clear packing tape over it, and that will give it more strength and prevent bleed through. The disadvantage of that is it makes the surface very slick, and I just find sometimes that drives me a little crazy, but it does work. I do prefer the masking magic. Okay, so now I'm just continuing to apply colors just like we did before. I do get more detail when I use masking paper because it's thinner than the cardstock I used before, so I'm able to get into those tiny, tight areas better. But the difference is pretty small, so whatever option works for you or seems like it would work best for you is the one I recommend trying. Okay, so now I can peel this off and move it on to another card. There is one disadvantage to using masking paper for a stencil that I wanted to demonstrate. Once you have put ink on this masking paper, nothing's really going to want to stick to it. So watch, I'm going to come in with my little mask circle here, try to place it on top. It's not going to want to stick there. See how it just doesn't stick? That's because we have ink on our mask stencil. And that's masking paper has kind of a slick finish to it. The cardstock didn't have that problem before. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. However, I'm not going to give up on this stencil that I made from masking paper. It still will work great. We just instead will change our plans and do multicolor blending instead of masking off each ring or area. So I did some pink in the center. I put some peach around that and then yellow on the outside. I allowed all of that blending to overlap, and this will give us a more blended look, but we will still have the multiple colors. Okay, so I like the look of that pink and yellow there instead of the full rainbow, so I thought I'd do another with less colors. This time up in the top left corner, I'm just doing some blues and greens. So you definitely could change the color combinations between each background so you can have more variety. Totally up to you and whatever you prefer. Now at this point, I thought it'd be fun to add some glitter gel over this, like I did in one of my examples earlier. Now, I don't think masking paper works very well when adding like a wet, thick product over it since it's very thin. I do recommend making your stencil out of cardstock or something thicker if you want to use a glitter gel, but I'll demonstrate it here. So once again, I have my glitter Glitz from Gina K. I'm applying it over it. It's nice because it'll be a very thin layer. It'll look really nice. However, I'm putting a lot on those detailed parts of my mask and it just tore. So you can see it made a mess, but I'm saving it. I'm carefully taking off all of those mask pieces and the result's just fine. But you can see how putting the glitter Glitz gel or any paste over the die cut cardstock stencil gave much better results. So keep that in mind, but those are two different ways that I prefer to create my own stencils using a die. Okay, so now that we have all of these backgrounds done, I wanted to show you some ways to step it up and show you the final cards. Now remember from our first set of backgrounds we created, I had the leftover cardstock stencil with all the color on it, and I die cut a circle around it. That's the piece that you see up there on the top left. Well, I used that same circle die to cut 2 white cardstock circles that I'll glue behind it. That'll just give it some dimension and allow it to stand up on our background a bit. Now I also wanted to add a little bit of interest to the white note card. You can see there's some stenciling on there. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the Boho circle die has a sister stencil that's the same pattern but bigger. And I fell in love with that in another video that I did. I thought it'd be fun to use these together. I love that companies are coming out with stencils and dies that can be used separately and together. Now here is a card that I made in a previous video using the circle stencil. Very simple design. I will link to the video where I use the stencil, so you can check that out. It'll be here on the top right. So all of the techniques we did today, you could use with the stencil, except for some of those, like making an impression with the die and so on. So keep that in mind. You can use these things together and in different ways. But today I thought it'd be fun to use the die and the stencil together. I will ink up the stencil very lightly on the background, and then we will put our die cut piece right in the center of the pattern. So I'm lining it up here where I like it. I'll put some tape on the bottom. Now I'm just using a blending brush and a very soft ink. Normally I like to use Simon Says Stamp Fog ink for this because it's very light. I can't find my Simon Says Stamp Fog ink pad at the moment, so I'm using the Hero Arts Soft Granite ink, which is another nice light gray. I just went lighter handed. Okay, so now after I've inked that, I will put this right in the center, and you can see how the boho circle pattern now extends across the background. Okay, now I'm adding a sentiment. This is a Simon Says Stamp Thanks die. I've used it in videos before. I die cut it 3 times from black cardstock, glued it together for a stacked look, and now I use my T-ruler to put it in place. Next, I wanted to add a little sentiment strip underneath, so I'm using a Simon Says Stamp CZ Design sentiment strip set. These are pre-printed and you just need to cut them. Let me show you a trick for cutting them. I use my Tim Holtz trimmer and I put a piece of scrap paper right up against the blade. Then underneath that, I slide my pre-printed sentiments and I line up the sentiment I want with that white cardstock. So I have, I feel lucky to know you. Then I cut there. So that white cardstock piece is showing me where I'm going to cut. So now I take that same piece, I'm lining up my white cardstock again with the blade. I'll tuck this underneath, line it up with the edge of the white cardstock where I want it to cut. Then I can cut, and I have a sentiment strip cut, and I get the centering just right when I cut it by using that cardstock right against the edge of the blade. So I added that sentiment strip right below our thanks die cut. I then also added a bunch of white pearls. Now I used a lot of pearls and gems today, a ton of them. Most of them are from Lucy's Cards, Trinity Stamps, or Studio Katia. I absolutely love adding gems or pearls to the patterns on my cards because it really adds a lot of interest. You could also use liquid pearls or tonic Nuvo drops or different things to the pattern. Whatever you have would be great. Even sequins would be wonderful, or tiny little die cut dots. Here's another example where I used the large boho circle stencil along with the smaller boho circle die stencil that we created. So under there, I have the portion that we inked using the stencil we made from the die. And then just around the outside edge, I'm adding onto the real stencil a little bit of soft yellow ink. So really, I'm just extending the design, adding a bit more to it. If you have 2 circle stencils of any kind of design, you could do something like this. Or if you have any 2 stencils that you could ink up kind of next to each other or overlapping, you can create new designs too. This time I'm putting a little pink right in the center only, just to add a little bit of layering in there too. Okay, so now we have loads of inked backgrounds ready to be turned into cards, and I have some tips to share with you along the way. On all of my cards, I made the focal point in the center of all of our ink circles as a black die cut sentiment. Whenever I create black die cut sentiments, I prefer to use Tim Holtz Alcohol Ink Matte Cardstock. This cardstock has a beautiful matte finish to it. It almost looks like it's kind of velvety or suede, and it's super dark. I'm also using Altenew double-sided adhesive sheets on the back of the black cardstock before we die cut. That way, when I die cut it, they're basically little stickers that I can layer together and add to our project. I don't always use adhesive sheets with die cutting. I usually only do so if it's an intricate die or if they're small sentiments, because it saves time and hassle when I'm putting them together. So now I have 2 pieces of this great black cardstock with adhesive on the back, and I can die cut a bunch of sentiments for my different cards. This one here says, "Thank you for being a friend." I used this in my last video many times, and today I'm using it a little differently. Instead of using the whole sentiment that says, "Thank you for being a friend," I'm using "thank you" on one card and the word "friend" on another card. So I'm actually cutting the words apart. If you have any word dies that have multiple words, remember you can cut them apart after you have die cut them and use those words separately. It's an excellent way to stretch the use of your dies. I did this 3 times so that I had 3 thank yous and 3 friends. I used the 3 friend die cuts on this card here. I put the 3 friend die cuts together so we have dimension there that stands out on our background. So you can see here the inked background that we created by using our Boho circle stencil that we created with our die, and then the real stencil around it. So we did some layering there. I also added some light pink, apricot, and yellow pearls to the pattern, which I really think makes a big difference. I also put a little peach color heart underneath our sentiment. And the "I appreciate you," I'll show you what stamp set that is from in a moment. That's white heat embossed on the same black cardstock that I used for that friend sentiment. So I used that "thank you for being a friend" die, and I got more life out of it by just using the word "friend" on this card. Now we had the thank you portion of that die cut left over. I stacked those 3 die cuts together and added them to the center of this card. Now this is one of our backgrounds that I didn't do anything to. Remember, I just inked this one up at the beginning, left it smooth. I did add some gemstones to it for sparkle, trimmed the background down and added it to a black note card. I did put a white panel on the inside of the note card too, so I could easily write a personal message inside. On this simple background that was just inking, those gems really make a big difference. Okay, let's move on to another design. I did a couple like this, where the circle is off to the side on a card, and I put a thanks sentiment in the center. This time I used my favorite all-time thanks die, and this is the Simon Says stamp, Big Thanks die. It cuts the word thanks and the shadow. I did the word thanks from black cardstock and the shadow from white, and I added it right in the center of that boho circle that we inked. Here I have the "I appreciate you so much" sentiment that I showed you before. I white heat embossed that on black cardstock, and I put some extra black cardstock strips behind it so that this has dimension to it. That'll hold up nicely, and I'm putting that right underneath the die cut thanks. Now notice that this card is narrow. It's not actually 4¼ inches wide. It's about 4 inches wide. The reason I did that is you can see I made the thanks die cut hang off the edge. See how that part of the T is hanging off the edge? I love that look when something hangs off. So I cut the note card a little narrow so that it'll still fit in the envelope fine. Now this is the one where we inked with blues and greens, and then we put some glitter glitz gel over it. And when that was dry, we used that bigger stencil to add a little bit of gray around it, just to extend that pattern. I also added some gemstones to it. So here you can see how even though there's something hanging off the side of the card, it will still fit in the envelope nicely. Here's another that I did somewhat the same. I did make my card narrow so that the die could hang off the side. And this time I added some pearls to the pattern. I'll admit, I have a lot of pearls and gems in different colors, but I use them on almost every card. So for me, it's worth it. I like that Gems and Pearls come in a small package that doesn't cost much, but there are tons in there and plenty to use on many cards. It's one of those things you don't really have to replenish all that often because there's so many. But again, you could use a liquid product to make those dots if you prefer. Now, a lot of people ask what I do about mailing cards with this many pearls on it, a lot of little gemstones or pearls. Well, there are several things you can do, and I'll talk about them soon in a video. You could use a rigid mailer or a padded envelope, but another trick that you can do is to slide something in the envelope on the side where the pearls are, like a piece of acetate. That'll protect your envelope from getting torn. Another thing you can do is put clear packing tape on the back of that envelope once the card's in there, and that will protect it. Or you can put packing tape in the inside of the envelope and nobody would see it, and that gives the envelope a little more durability. Okay, here is another card. This one is 5 inches by 5 inches. This is where we layered the rings of the inked circle that we created. I put it on a craft background where I inked with the large stencil and a light gray ink. Again, I went to town with all the little gemstones on this, and I added an old Hello die cut. That's from Simon Says Stamp 2. And then I put a little Love You under there from a sentiment strip stamp set. This bad boy has a lot of dimension, and I'll be handing this to the recipient. I do have 5.5 by 5.5 inch envelopes, but you could use a 5 by 7 if you prefer. Now, this is my favorite of the bunch because it has that texture. This is the one where we made that impression. Again, notice the difference. I did add some pearls to this one in different colors, and a simple thanks to the center. That thanks sentiment is black cardstock, and then the shadow I cut from white. I like when I can do the shadow for the sentiment with white because it helps to make the sentiment stand out even more. This is another older Simon Says Stamp thanks die set. You'll notice that all my cards today are pretty much thank you themes because I need thank you cards. But you can put in the center any sentiment that you need for whatever occasion you have. That's the nice thing about cards like this. You can make it work for a variety of things. You could even leave this sentiment off, and when you need something in particular, you can add that sentiment. Here's another one of the first ones we created. This is where we inked over our DIY stencil and then put glitter glitz gel over it. And look at that sparkle. I added lots of different colors of gemstones to this one, and I kept that sentiment in the center nice and simple. It's just 3 layers of black cardstock that says thanks, and this is probably from one of the first Simon Says Stamp dies I ever got, and it is the thanks die. I've used this many times over the past several years. It fits nicely in the center of that circle. All right, there you have loads of ideas for using your die cuts as stencils. It allows you to get more out of the product and just have fun in a different way. If you are interested in any of the products I talk about, they're linked below in my YouTube description. At the end here, I'm going to link a couple of videos, and one of them is my last video where I used a lot of the same products in a different way. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Also, at the end, I will link to my blog in the top right corner. You can head over there for more information, special discount codes, and more. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again very soon with more techniques.